Welcome to the Feisworld podcast, engaging conversations that cross the boundaries between business, art, and the digital world.
Welcome back to episode 2 of the Feisworld podcast. Since releasing episode 1 just about a week ago, I received some really good feedback from friends, coworkers, and those of you who stumbled upon my blog online via iTunes and Stitcher. Please know that hearing from you means a lot to me, and seeing 76 unique shares out of Facebook from my blog really encouraged me to keep going. I feel flattered knowing that most of you listen to NPR, Fresh Air, This American Life, Freakonomics, and added my podcast in the mix. So today on Feisworld Podcast, you have a very special guest awaiting for you. His name is Josh Green. Josh helps create digital experiences and the organizational changes to realize them. So what does that mean? In part 1 of my discussion with Josh, he will break down these concepts for you. Furthermore, he dives into the world of digital strategy, including the curious questions such as how and when was digital appended to general strategy. Josh also offers advice for people fresh out of school or experienced people who are willing to consider digital strategy as a new career path. The best part of all this is that Josh has a serious Australian accent. I hope that alone will make your time well spent. With a background in consulting and the academy, Josh believes nothing is as complex as a simple solution and that small ball wins. Josh has earned a PhD in media studies from MIT, writing 300-odd pages about Dawson's Creek and Australian television. He is a fan of home cooking and mass transit. Please welcome Josh Green. So, welcome Josh Green to my podcast, Feisworld Podcast, and I've already given our audience an intro of you.
Fantastic.
Great, but I would still like you to actually introduce yourself in your own words so they could actually hear it in your own voice for a couple of minutes if you don't mind.
Sure. My name is Joshua Green. I do strategy here at Arnold. I work in advertising now, which is kind of an interesting experience for me because I started my career as an academic. I used to do a lot of work about the changing nature of media distribution and consumption patterns and the implication of digital technologies on how we understood practices of viewing and the way that we were responding as audiences and content creators and industrial structures and regulatory bodies. But I stopped doing that a couple of years ago and moved into management consulting, which was fun for a while, and now here I am working in advertising. I have a very thick Australian accent, so that's fun. And I like home cooking and mass transit. Those are two of my favorite things.
I saw that on your LinkedIn profile. Start cracking up. I mean, I understand the first one, but mass transit. My
God, mass transit. Mass transit is amazing. So I grew up in a satellite city, a small town called Ipswich, which was once a mining town, as many towns called Ipswich are. Anyway, Ipswich was 45 minutes outside of the Big Smoke, major city, Brisbane, the capital of Queensland. And it was a product of urban sprawl. It was very suburban, small, central business district. I spent a lot of time riding my bicycle around and then later, driving cars around. And the way that we got around in this small, crappy little town that I grew up in was that we drove cars everywhere. So for me, one of the markers of a big city, which I was always fascinated by, was a mass transit system. So, we had commuter rail trains. But even in Brisbane, Brisbane is a large, expansive city. But it's a city that grew up in an era when the world moved a little slower and when population density was lower. It's only been in the last 15 years that the population density in Brisbane has increased sufficient enough to justify the development of significant public transit infrastructure. They often have a bus system, but they don't have, they don't have a subway, they don't have light rail, a little bit of light rail, those sorts of things. Anyway, so for me, one of the markers of a big city and the excitement of like a real town was always a mass transit system. And one of my favorite mass transit systems is, of course, the
New York.
The subway in New York City. But I like the subway here in Boston. I love the MBTA, first subway in the country. But I like mass transit systems. And I like mass transit systems because they represent like the excitement of a big city. They represent modernity, which I have this really complex relationship with, and I think at the same time they are a fascinating way to understand transiting through space, moving populations, where you exist and how your existence can be defined by the environment in which you live, how you shape the environment around you. There's a real sense of mastery to being able to use a mass transit system, especially one that has a complex network like the subway in New York. One of the challenges of mass transit systems, I think, for certain populations, are that they are the only option. So if all you have is a single bus from your house into town or where you work, right? I mean, that's a difficult way for you to get around. But if you are, say, traversing a small, densely populated stretch of land like Manhattan, or a slightly larger but still densely populated stretch of land like, say, New York City, being able to successfully navigate on the subway system is an exercise in understanding how the city operates, right? Knowing which trains go from A to B, understanding where you can, like where the junction points are, where you should be. A friend of mine, Jim, loves to talk about the pre-walk. Like when we would, when he and I worked in New York together, we would always, sometimes we would commute home together, and we both had the same pre-walk in that we both walked to the same spot on the platform in order to board the right carriage so that when it pulled up, it was next to the stairs that we needed to get out on when we wanted to go to our respective stops. So, there's a certain degree of mastery, I think, to being able to navigate a system, like that, to being confident. It gives you control over the city and the space, as well as just the sheer joy of all of the complex analog and digital machinery that makes all of that work. If you go to Union Square, in New York, and you're riding the 4 train, the platform is actually on a curve, and so they have these bits of platform that extend out in order to make sure that you don't fall down the gap. Like stuff like that just gets the little boy inside of me super excited. It's the closest thing we have to giant battling robots.
I'm so glad you said all that because I think you're very closely answering the next question, which I'm going to let you know anyway. Because my next question is actually related to digital strategy.
Okay.
And I have a sense that as the podcast continues to grow, have more audience who subscribe to it, I think we'll self-identify it to potentially, this is all assumption, people are very interested in sort of digital strategy, advertising, and all that. But assume for now that there's like half of our audience aren't quite clear on what digital strategy even is. I love the story because you already started to touch upon the way. I really like the way you think, like patterns of your thinking, which I think is very unique from given your background, which we're going to kind of drill in a little bit more. So if you don't mind providing sort of a not a generalization, but sort of your interpretation for what digital strategy is.
So digital strategy is like asking what chocolate ice cream is, right? In order to understand what chocolate ice cream is, you need to know what ice cream is, right? So ice cream in this instance is made from a custard. No, ice cream in this instance is this activity called strategy, and strategy is a function. We talk about it as if it's a role, but really it's a thing that we do, and it is a planning and vision function, right? So strategy is about understanding, determining how you need to achieve the objectives that lay before you, right? It requires you to build some models perhaps, or understand the outcomes that you're trying to achieve, and then to determine what are the best ways in order for you to get from the point that you're at right now to the point that you'd like to be. So strategy grows itself. So strategy as a discipline grows out of the emergence of consulting in the 1950s and 60s and 70s. So the growth of BCG, Bain, and McKinsey really brings us to the emergence of business strategy, which is this proposition that you need to pay attention to market forces rather than just continuing to do the things that are making you profits. Strategy grows out of this notion that you, as a business owner, will not be able to see all of the things that will potentially cause you challenges in the future, and so you need to start to imagine potential futures, determine ways in which you would like your business to grow, and to focus on ways to confront those futures. So strategy becomes this discipline of plan building, if you like, of understanding what the potential transitions, challenges, obstacles, and successes you're going to face in the future might be, to determine where you would like to end up at a certain future point, and then to construct a set of plans in order to get there. I use the word planning, but it's not planning the way that we think about brand planning, comms planning, media planning, or anything like that. It's not economic planning, it's not business planning. Strategy is more about determining the activities that you need to take, not sequencing them up and looking at the minutiae of the day-to-day factors. So broadly, I realize that was a tumbling kind of definition. So strategy is the act of working out how to get from A to B and overcoming the obstacles in the way. It is the act of determining where your business would like to end up and what it needs to do in order to realize those objectives. When we talk about digital strategy, that's where we talk about chocolate ice cream. So, digital strategy is just a particular flavor of strategy, and like many other parts of the business and media world, and in fact culture at large, the last 25 to 30 years has been defined. But one of the defining factors of the last 25 to 30 years has been the appending or the addition of the word digital to a whole range of things in order to try and mark them out as somewhat different from what came before them, right? So, we talk about digital television, although that is distinct from analog TV, right? Analog TV being the use of analog radio waves to broadcast television signals. Digital TV being a construction of a digital signal that is then broadcast out to sets. We talk about digital advertising being the leveraging of digital platforms for advertising purposes, right? But at the end of the day, how is it different from advertising generally? Well, it's just it's another form, it's another type. So digital strategy is a particular focus, if you like, for strategic activities that looks specifically at how we can take advantage of digital tools or respond to changes within the emerging digital landscape in order to sort of plan out our next steps.
That is a fantastic answer. I am really just kind of laughing at myself right now. To my audience, we have not rehearsed this. But the funny thing is, I had a sequence of questions. How is digital strategy different from the general strategy? And then you actually answered like 2 more questions, which is wonderful. I find this conversation to be very fascinating because Bob Goodman, one of our senior UX designers, sent to us, I think there were 20 people on that email thread, a deck, a presentation, to people who don't know what a deck is, of you, and I think it was titled Josh Green, Digital Strategist.
Ah, yes, I made that to explain what it was I do for the agency.
Fantastic. I was wondering if I could leverage that, if I could, maybe save it on the my website and then reference as part of the podcast.
Not a problem.
Fantastic. And I also love the fact that, I remember my earlier conversation with Caleb, who is he said, I'm really turned off when people ask me to kind of like say, what is my title?
and sort of labeling me in such a way, and I do this, I don't do that, because as we all know, Caleb kind of does a whole array of things.
Kind of expansive in his capabilities.
Exactly right. And but I also love the fact that you are very clear on who you are, what you do, and be very comfortable. That's kind of my take on that, reading that presentation. And I love how it was beautifully constructed, very kind of a simple, vector approach, black and white, and I actually read through the whole thing. And for someone like me, being in the industry for about 8 years, right, oftentimes, especially working in a bigger agency where there are hundreds of departments, I got confused. What do you do? Who are you again? Like, what is the sequence of things? You explained it very well. So I was wondering, you're young. I mean, Josh, you're young, and but obviously we both have more experience than somebody who's fresh out of school, and you are in a position. If I were to mention, digital strategist versus my role project manager, I mean, I would assume 80% of the general population will find your position to be way more compelling.
Oh, like, come.
Yeah, seriously, I could imagine people very early, or even early on in their career, to ask you the question,
sure,
what does it take to be a strategist or a digital strategist?
Right.
Furthermore, I think one of the struggles is that what you do, based on what you just said, I think your role kind of thrives on knowledge, experience, very much of that may be intimidating to people who are kind of new to their career. Sort of, what's your take on that?
I think, so strategy as I practice it, so for whatever that's worth.
So humble.
Strategy as I practice it is fundamentally about problem solving. And I think one of the keys to being a good strategist within an agency context, right? Because there are different types of scenarios in which you will encounter people who do something called strategy. But I think in an agency context, one of the best things. So what are the skills that are needed? Let me just read. Okay, here we go. So I think that. How do you be a good strategist? So I think that you need to focus on problem solving. I think that you need to think outside of the trappings of the agency. So I don't know that it would be possible for someone to get an entry-level job as a strategist, quote unquote, and grow up to be a good one. Because I think in order to be a good strategist, you need to have done things other than just worked within an agency. And I say that because many of the ways in which we do things within the agency are very curious and one would say dumb. And that's true of any organization. Right? Any organization has a set of behaviors and logics that at times it can have trouble thinking outside of. And one of the key things to doing good strategy is being able to think outside of the current frames. So, part of what you need to focus on when you're doing strategy is the outcome that you want to achieve. Often the reason you can't achieve that outcome, if indeed you can define what it is, so let's assume that you define what that outcome is, the reason you can't achieve that outcome is because you don't have the right tools. You need to recognize that the tools that you have right now are not the only tools. There is nothing natural about the formation of an advertising agency or indeed of any corporation in the world, any corporate structure, and I would dare say any organizational structure, right? There are very few things which are natural, which is to say nothing needs be the way that it is right now. We can find different ways to do things. And part of the role of strategy is to determine how best you can do something. Now, yes, you need to sometimes play with the tools that you have, right? We can't say, hey, I really wish this ice cream was a margarita, right, and then magically have it become margarita, right? You cannot make an ice cream into a margarita. Even if you can freeze a margarita, that's not ice cream. Which is to say, you have to work with some of the ingredients that you have, but those ingredients, may not be the only ones. Those ingredients may not be the right ones, and you need to be able to look beyond the set that you have. So if we say we really want to be a margarita right now or ice cream, what we might need to do is, invent ice cream flavored margaritas. I have no idea how we're going to do that, but that's a whole set of jobs. By saying we are ice cream, we'd like to be margarita, but we can only work with eggs and milk and ice and a mixer and that other stuff they put into to help solidify, and like the machine they have on Top Chef. Like those tools and ingredients are only ever going to create ice cream. So, if you want to be something else, if you're going to achieve some goal, then you need to, be able to think beyond the tools that you have. Mm-hmm. So, I would say that the key at doing good strategy is having done something else. And that's in part because the more other things you do, the fresher perspectives you learn, but also the more you realize that the world doesn't have to be the way that it is right now. Mm-hmm. And that helps you confront disruption. It helps you become adaptive. It helps you, find new ways. It also, means that you don't see the ways that things are right now as necessarily predetermined or the only way that things can be achieved. Mm-hmm. So that's the first thing that I would say, right? Do something else. Be better at your job. Now, do something else. I think the second thing that I would say is that if you want to be a good digital strategist, you need to know about how business is done. Mm-hmm. In fact, that's true of any strategist. I think that all strategy needs to be focused on delivering upon business outcomes. If it's not focused on driving business value, if it's not focused on achieving the objectives of the overall business, then it ends up being a little self-serving. And it's very easy to make plans that make it easy for us to make ads within the agency context. But what say the solution to the problem isn't a set of ads, right? What say the solution to the problem actually is like fire your ad agency. I think as a strategist, you need to say, okay, well, this is, these are, in order to achieve these objectives, this is the way forward. You need to dump your ad agency, take on capabilities internally, and, and act in that manner. Mm-hmm. Well, that's kind of, it is a confronting recommendation. I have no idea if that's a recommendation. Well, I actually made that recommendation before, but, you need, I suppose, to be focused on what's best for the business, which means you need to understand how business operates. You need to think about all that kind of stuff. And then I think the third thing I would say is that, and this is, I suppose, if you're interested in becoming a digital strategist, is that you need to have an expansive view of what constitutes digital. Mm-hmm. I don't think a lot about digital. I think a lot about user experiences. I think a lot about customer experiences. I think a lot about business models. I think a lot about what it is to be an audience. I think about reading and how enjoyable reading is. I think about how enjoyable looking at things are. I think about how enjoyable navigating environments can be. None of that is thinking about like digital stuff. Mm-hmm. Now, I have a rudimentary knowledge of a whole bunch of digital things, right? I know a little bit of coding, and I know devices, and I know protocols, and I can talk about how you develop digital products. But in order to properly be, I think, a digital strategist, you need to think about all of and be immersed in all of the things that digital actually does. Mm-hmm. And that is that, digital is about a set of tools, it's about utility, it's about control. Digital provides us with tactility. So where previous mediums, we think particularly broadcast mediums, and I would include static advertising in this, so printed word, out-of-home materials, broadcast media, both radio and television, those are not particularly plastic, right? They're relatively fixed when you receive them. Yes, we do a lot of meaning making, and we can choose to read things in different ways, but there's not a lot of things that we can do within those mediums themselves, right? Mm-hmm. You can recut audio, you can recut video, you can physically cut print materials. You can write your own print materials. But in terms of actually manipulating the artifacts within the medium in which they were delivered, it's pretty much a one-way street. When we look at digital, on the other hand, it's very easy for us to actually take the physical artifacts themselves. So take the website, the components of the website, or pieces of an application, or whatever it might be, break them apart and reconstitute them in such a way that they look function and feel a lot like the original thing, right? So, you can remake something which is digital and redistribute it in a format that is as seamless as the format in which you got it in the first place, right? So, I think that tactility, I think that the extent to which we can and do change and expect to be able to manipulate and take action with digital tools, means that we're focused on what it is to actually engage with and interact with, with the communications mediums, and also with sort of the texture of the world around us. So I think a lot about that. I think a lot about the fact that the drive towards automation that has come about in the last 30 to 40 years with the emergence of, we think about touch dial phones, you think about phone trees, customer service, self-service, automation, ATMs, all those sorts of things, that's all a drive to make us, the customer, into a set of users, who are expected to navigate complex systems without a guide. I think digital has accelerated that, and we see, increasingly with things like click to chat, but also forums for support. If you think about what it is to try and fix a piece of technology these days, it often involves going onto the internet and searching for the problem or the solution, and then finding, a discussion or a blog or a video that somebody who may not be the manufacturer, in fact, who incredibly likely is not the manufacturer, right? The wonderful crowds that, surround and support us, they are the ones who provide us with the solutions, and then you don't take it in for servicing the way you used to with a television. You just try and fix it yourself, right? And sometimes that doesn't work, and so you have to go off and get some assistance, but oftentimes that does.
And it's so true. You just reminded me of the massive success of Stack Overflow.
Right.
Stack
Overflow,
Exchange,
GitHub, Stack Exchange, Quora. We talk about Wikipedia. We can talk about any discussion forum. Apple's discussion forums are fascinating because there is a company that has actively tried to hermetically seal its products, and yet you can, within the ecosphere of Apple, find solutions for the very products they're trying to lock up from you.
This is so true. Every time, we are severely sort of indexed on Macs. Anything in the agency, we are all using Macs here, designers, non-designers. But what I find fascinating is we constantly run into issues, and I call help desk directly. And whenever I stumble upon an Apple sort of community forum, there's no problem that's being solved. Usually you read the issue 13 threads later, there's no solution. Right. It's so funny now I think about it. Thanks for bringing it up. And honestly, there was 200 questions in my accumulated in my brain just now. One of the things I find fascinating, is kind of going back to almost something you mentioned 5 minutes ago, was how, you mentioned that you like to you didn't use the word condition, but I wonder, how do you condition yourself to become even more more intelligent, more conditioned when it comes the digital world, and to suit your job or possibly decisions and your life outside of work as well. That's lightly touching upon what your daily routine, what is your day like, what are some of the blogs you read, do you block out any time, right? I see most of the people come to work, they just work, go to meetings. Do you carve out a certain period of your day, go to conferences and things along that line?
A couple of things to start with, I suppose. I believe very much that all things in life ebb and flow. And so there have been periods in my life of intense study and periods in my life of absolutely no study. I am probably right now about to turn the corner into a period of intense study. So, what has happened is that I don't have regular good reading habits, right? I often do a bit of catch as catch can, but anyway, so that's just a little. So yes, I start every single day by reading Metafilter, which is and remains the greatest community forum on the internet. Quora be damned. So I spend every morning, I begin the day by reading Metafilter, and the curious thing about Metafilter is that it is a group blog, right, where anyone can can write an article, and it has a form. It has a form, and I really like the form. You know, it's often link heavy. They encourage the writing of sort of short paragraph style posts with links that point you to direct things. You know, rather than just sort of here's a link and something interesting. But what I find often about Metafilter is that increasingly I read fewer and fewer of the linked articles and more of the discussion and commentary about them. You know, and that's in part because Metafilter is it's a successful community, online community. They're struggling a little around monetization because some changes to the way that Google indexes the page kind of dinged their ad views, but you know, but they have active moderators and a real community-based moderation policy that works. And so anyway, it's a community that I like, and so I enjoy that. I spend the morning. The first thing I do of a morning as I have my breakfast is I like to read Metafilter. I then like to find out what long-form articles have popped up on Medium. And then hopefully I will ride my bicycle to work, and often on the way to work, especially if I'm on the bus, I like to do a little bit of podcasting.
Oh, yes.
So there are a number of quite enjoyable podcasts that I like to soak in.
Name a few?
There's one called Future Tense, which is from the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. I like This American Life because I'm a nerd. I like to listen to, there's a British program called Infinite Monkey Cage, which is about physics. There's an Australian news program called Background Briefing, which is investigative reporting. There are a couple of media-related podcasts that I enjoy a whole lot. And a few other bits and pieces. I'm really enjoying Serial right now, which is a spin-off of This American Life, and it's very interesting when we think about the future state of investigative, or the contemporary state of investigative reporting, podcasting, radio, and journalism, and all of that.
I have to get on that.
Yeah. And then I'll do some work, and then often of the afternoon, I will read things which interest me, and then I like to read fiction of an evening.
Very nice.
So there you go. That's what my day looks like.
So,
and I read a lot of Reddit.
A lot of Reddit?
A lot of Reddit.
Nice. I'm going to include some of the recommendations in the show notes as well.
Sure.
I take it pretty seriously. And I love the fact that you mentioned reading a lot or listening, multiple sort of channels to kind of really get your hands on, knowledge base. And some of these mentioned, I would argue they're not so tightly related to digital strategy, to what we do. Back to your point of could be a hodgepodge, but you might be able to surprise yourself.
And yet the way that, the curatorial current moment that we're living in, the way that it works is that, a lot of what I read on Medium are articles written by or referred by friends of mine about design or strategy or UX or customer experiences. I like to trawl through Forrester's customer experience sort of stuff. There's a lot of, I swim a lot in the world of lean startup, agile methodology, agile business, lean business agile, agile business company, disrupt, buzzword, which I find kind of tiring, I will admit, because I had to stop reading TechCrunch a little while ago because it felt like we were constantly locked in the hype cycle. So I do read relatively regularly about startup-y things, and that keeps you close to the digital business side of things. I think if you want to be a good digital strategist, you need to understand design. I'm a terrible designer. I have zero artistic bones in my body, but I like to read about design. Design is one of the most crucial things at the moment, right? When we think about the significant tools that we have to help people navigate the world. Design is becoming increasingly important as we have more and more products and more tools are being created that ask and expect us to respond or interact with them. increasingly design decisions, are helping to shape the logics of the way that we interface with technologies. Think about the hamburger button, right? The invention of the hamburger. I do not know what its history is, although I did read once about the history of the hamburger, but it's completely gone out of my brain. But like that is a convention now. But at some point, somebody had to develop that as a solution to a problem, and it's now become fixed and standard. And we are still, I think, at a period of rapidly evolving how you can interact with screens and with digital tools, and so I think we're still rapidly creating the conventions. Pull down to refresh was an invention of a single app developer sometime in 2006, I think it was, after the release of the first iPhone. So soon after it was released, we needed a whole new set of logics, right? A whole new set of language, and a whole new literacy to understand how to interact with these touchscreen devices, and we're still developing that. And so I think you need to understand design, principles of design, but also the impact, significance of design, what design can do, what good design is, what contemporary design trends are. I think those are as important for being a digital strategist as understanding startups and lean software development and mobile first platform creation and all that kind of other jargony stuff that we talk about. Disruption and anyway.
I think curiosity is sort of a theme here as well. Right?
Love being curious.
Yeah, I think that's super important. I remember that also in my 20s, kind of always fear that I didn't know what I didn't know, versus now I sort of know, I sort of getting to the I know what I don't know part, and it's almost like what a relief. And to be able to admit that and still kind of soak myself in to many of the channels you mentioned. My personal favorite podcasts are, one of them being the Tim Ferriss, the guy who created the 4-Hour Work Week, and James Altucher. So it's really fascinating. So I was wondering if someone, one or many of our audience wants to kind of live in your brain and kind of follow you around a little bit, where should they find you? Twitter? I mean, what are some of the channels where you kind of share your knowledge?
So, I mentioned that I was on the cusp of. So I've been really bad lately. I haven't written anything significant in 6 months, 7 months. So I gave up. I abandoned Facebook years ago, many years ago. And I abandoned Twitter for the same reason about 2 years ago. I find the signal to noise ratio there. I have this theory about social networking platforms that once they reach a tipping point, their ability to provide meaningful interactions declines exponentially. And so I think that the greatest challenge, and we've seen Facebook twist itself into knots in trying to sort of get this right, is that once you get mass appeal, and Twitter suffers from the same problem, it is too onerous for users to filter their feeds in order to get the information that they want, and as a result, value declines. So we've seen, if you think about the ways that Facebook has been tweaking their algorithm for what gets displayed in the news feed and percentage of fans and all of that sort of stuff, all of that is an attempt to keep utility high in an environment where there is more and more noise. Anyway, all of which is to say I gave up on social networking because the noise signal to noise ratio was off. What I'm mostly interested in right now, and I'm about to embark on a new project soon, and I think that what I find fascinating right now is Medium as a platform, because it forces us to think about writing and long form writing. Also, it provides inline comments, which are amazing. So I'm fascinated by the ability to do long form writing at Medium, and I think that Gorka's Kinja platform despite the recent problems they had with, regulating comments and, which is, to be honest, more of a problem with the nature of terrible people on the internet. But anyway, Gawker's challenges regulating comments aside, I think that Kinja is a fascinating platform for opening up publishing and blogging. It's such a flexible platform.
How to spell Kinja?
Kinja.
Okay. Great.
So I don't know. If you wanted to follow me around, you'd have a difficult time right now because I'm not particularly public. If you wanted to do the things that I do, however, I encourage people to indulge themselves at least once a week chasing a rabbit hole on Wikipedia, because getting into Wikipedia is just so fascinating.
To listen to more episodes of the Feisworld podcast, please subscribe on iTunes or visit feisworld.com. That is FEISWORLD, where you can find show notes, links, and other tools and resources. You can also follow me on Twitter at Feisworld. Until next time, thanks for listening.